Hey kids, welcome to the Far Out Podcast. I am your host, James, but I am not by myself this time. I am with a good friend known as Luke Larson. Luke, why don't you say something to let the kids know that you're real?
I'm real.
Oh, he's real,
the,
kids.
The reports of my non-existence have been greatly exaggerated.
Okay. All right. Right on. Well, it's great to see you. And just before we actually started recording, we were talking just briefly and whatnot. And we talked about how we saw each other during the first COVID summer in 2020. That was out by Cavalier. But I think the last time I saw you, I don't remember where specifically or the time frames. You're going to have to help me. But I do remember us going to the Runestone or Runestone Museum.
Oh yeah, right.
Where was that?
You could make a full podcast episode just on that thing.
Oh yeah.
The Kensington Runestone Museum. Gosh,
Okay.
that would have been that was probably around Christmas 2023.
Is that right?
That I was out there, yeah. So not that long ago. Didn't we have lunch up in Alexandria?
Yes.
Something like that. And then we went to the Runestone Museum, which is one of my favorite bits of Minnesota or even Midwest history.
Okay.
It's I don't know. Maybe you have a very sophisticated, knowledgeable, and cultured listener base that already knows what the Runestone is. But I'm always happy to talk about the Runestone if you want to talk about the Runestone.
No, please, because when we went there together, I had not heard of it ever. So I was getting to know of its existence and that even that period of time going through that museum. And so if you can give any kind of history lesson, I think I'd appreciate it.
It's a fascinating just kind of gem of Minnesota history that's very overlooked. I think a lot of people don't know about it, even in Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
I remember one time when I was working at Icelandic State Park, we got a call from a guy in New York City who was going to be driving across the country and stopping in at Icelandic, and he asked for recommendations along the way. And the Runestone Museum was one of my recommendations. It's always a recommendation of mine for people traveling in Minnesota. So the story of the Runestone, it was around turn of the century, 1800s, 1900s, I forget what year exactly, but there was a Minnesota farmer, Swedish farmer by Kensington, which is kind of by Alexandria, the lakes area of northwestern Minnesota. So Swedish immigrant farmer. And one summer day, they were uprooting a tree on the property. Big, old tree. I think it was dead or something like that. They were uprooting this old dead tree.
Yep.
And lodged deeply in the roots of this tree was a stone, a flat stone with writing on it.
Yep.
And so they kind of cut away the roots, and the stone looked like it was inscribed with Viking runes, like the Old Norse language.
Yep.
So extremely bizarre. Why would that be?
Right.
And they translated it. Sure enough, it was Old Norse, and the text was something to the effect of, "We, a group of 10 men, have traveled here from the north. We found 3 men dead and red with blood. Something.
Okay.
Ave Virgo Maria, like Hail Mary, Hail Virgin Mary." And then the year 1342 written on it. So it was immediately just a huge controversy. Just like captured the attention of media in Minnesota and around the country. And so of course the immediate reaction was to say that this is a hoax. Like there's no evidence of Vikings ever making it deep into the interior of North America. I don't even know if at that point it was known that they had in fact arrived in Newfoundland or Labrador in Canada. It's definitely proven now that there was a Viking settlement, or maybe multiple settlements. I think it's in Lanes O Meadow in Labrador, like the coast of eastern Canada, way up north.
Okay.
But I don't know if it was even known at that time that Vikings had arrived in North America. So the immediate accusation was that he had created this forgery to gain fame and fortune, and he was mocked, basically. And the interesting thing is, he never once recanted or said that it was a hoax. He never admitted that it was a hoax.
Okay.
He refused to, even after his family was just ridiculed for this. And I think his son even committed suicide over that.
I do remember that. Yeah.
And so he never turned back on it. He seemed convinced, at least from his public statements, that he had not planted this. It wasn't his own creation. Now, he did have a book on runes in his house, which adds a little suspicion to the case. But there's really interesting arguments back and forth. I would say most scholars believe it's a hoax. But I think there are interesting arguments for its veracity, and I don't think there's been conclusive proof that it's a hoax. One thing that I remember, one just interesting bit of evidence pointing to its authenticity, is there was a symbol on the stone that kind of looks like an R with a dot in the loop of the R.
Okay.
And it was believed that this was good evidence that it was not a real, it was not authentic, because that's not a letter that exists in the language in Old Norse.
Yeah.
But apparently later they found some inscriptions. I think it was on the island of Gotland in Sweden that did have that symbol, which I think lends it even more credibility. If like this Swedish farmer would not have known that was an authentic symbol.
Right.
It was not known at the time that it existed. So anyway, it's fascinating. Even if it is a fake, which very well might be, I think it's still just a really cool bit of Minnesota history. So now you can go to this little museum in Alexandria, and they have the stone on display. They have a whole exhibit about kind of Minnesota culture and Native American culture and the old Vikings, and it's a cool spot.
It is really cool, and I actually have, you can't see this, of course, but on my fridge, the one souvenir I got was a magnet of the Runestone, and so I'm looking at it now, and it's really cool to look at, even just in the art form, but yeah, to actually see it, it's quite interesting. And so so there's potential that it's real and it's not real. Do you have a personal opinion on if you think it is real or not?
I hope it's real.
Okay. And why is that? Why do you hope it's real?
I hope it's real because it would be so cool that this fascinating bit of history that kind of like rewrites the history books, that it's right home in Minnesota, and how fitting it would be that there was Scandinavian presence in Minnesota.
Yeah.
A place that eventually became very Scandinavian with all these immigrants from Sweden and Norway. That's another argument against it, by the way, is that, of course, they just conveniently happened to find something from Scandinavia as the Scandinavians were moving in and trying to kind of assert their place in America. So I hope it's real, just because it's a really interesting story. I've always been kind of fascinated by mysteries, like as a kid, reading books about alien abductions and ghosts and things like that. So I've always kind of been drawn to fun stuff like that, fun stories like that, things that are just kind of a little bit beyond what we know.
Sure.
Kind of a fun spot to be in, and the Runestone is in that. Well, actually, there's I'm interested in writing an article about there's a church in Kensington called Our Lady of the Runestone. It's a Catholic church. It's the only church in the world with that name, and so it's named for the runestone. And so I was looking into that a little bit, and apparently there was some Catholic interest in the runestone because like this, it was before the Protestant Reformation, so these Vikings were Catholics, and of course they ended the runestone with Ave Virgo Maria, like Hail.
Right. Yep.
And so there was a Minnesota Catholic historian who made the argument that inscription on the runestone is the first recorded evidence of a Christian prayer in the New World.
Oh wow!
It was like over 100 years before Columbus. So there was kind of this. There was a lot of interest among Minnesota Catholics in the 20th century about this, and partially too because it was like an evangelistic tool for the Scandinavian Protestants of Minnesota to say like, see, look, you have this beautiful Catholic heritage, Catholic Scandinavian heritage that even dates here to Minnesota. So there was kind of that attempt. On that note too, I was working on an article on Catholicism in Greenland. It's a country that's like 95% Danish Lutheran, but there's a small Catholic presence, and the Scandinavians, the Vikings, arrived in Greenland, like the southern tip of Greenland, in like 985 AD, I think, and set up some settlements. Apparently, the climate in Greenland was warmer at that time, so it was possible to farm. It's not possible now. Like you could grow food, and the Scandinavians were there on the southern tip of Greenland. There were multiple settlements for like 400 years. And then the last recorded evidence of them being in Greenland was 1408. There's a record of this high society wedding at a church. You can still see the ruins of this church today.
Sure.
I think it's Havalzi or something like that. And so, there were just these like Christian Europeans living in Greenland for hundreds of years. And it's interesting that Europe just like lost contact with them. Didn't know that they were still there, didn't know what was happening with them. And in the 1700s, there was a Danish priest who was determined to sail a journey to Greenland and convert these Scandinavian Catholics who had never heard about the Protestant Reformation. So he arrived in the 1700s thinking that Europeans would still be there. And he arrived and they had all gone. And they had been gone for 300 years. But people in Europe did not know that they had been gone for hundreds of years. They assumed that they were still there and they were still Catholic. So he arrived. There's no Europeans, no Catholics to speak of, and began converting the local Inuit population.
Wow, that's pretty crazy. And again, much like the runestone, I had never heard of that either. So, I mean, I find that incredibly fascinating. You dropped a lot of things that we could do a whole episode on. I mean, you talked about Catholicism, you mentioned aliens and so on, but like, I want to follow kind of the similar vein that we're on now, where you're talking about how the runestone, and its point in history might be real, might not be real. When we're both men of faith, and there's a lot of stuff in the news about how there's all these new discovery techniques and these new things being found using, LiDAR that can scan deep into the earth, and it's reportedly finding these ruins and these pieces of evidence from ancient civilizations that reportedly predate the Bible. And our world of faith is already under so much scrutiny as it is. And so I don't know how much you're in the news, but if and when you hear about there being a new potential discovery that, quote, dethrones the Bible, how do you respond to that, being the man of faith that you are?
Yeah. Well, you mentioned aliens. I feel like you can't have an hours long podcast episode without aliens coming up.
That's right.
At least once. So we got it out of the way early.
Yeah.
Yeah. that's interesting. I think, especially in the Catholic tradition, there's a very strong tradition and belief in the harmony of faith and science,
Okay.
and the harmony of faith and reason. That that truth is truth; it doesn't contradict itself, and so we have nothing to be afraid of in science. Like there's nothing nothing in science that should scare a Catholic or a faithful believing Christian.
Yep.
And so if there's something that appears to contradict an understanding of the faith, then I think you take it seriously, and you contribute to the research, and I think too there are understandings of the faith that I wouldn't consider dogmatic. Like there is a lot that is, I think, within what we would call deposit of faith as Catholics, that is essential to Christian belief, and we believe it on faith through reason too. But there's a lot that isn't necessarily part of the deposit of faith either. Trying to think of an example that isn't so cliche, but
no, it's okay. Like,
but with the kind of the classic Galileo question, that if you go back to your average European village, your average village in Christendom in the 900s or the 1100s or whatever it may be, I could be corrected on this, but I would imagine that most people would say that the Earth was at the center of the universe, and
right.
then they could bring up Scripture to point that out. But through great work of Christian scientists like Copernicus and Galileo, it became pretty clear that was not the case.
Yep.
And that was no difficulty for a believing Christian, because that belief was not essential to the Christian faith. So I guess I approach these kind of questions just with a confidence that comes from faith that this is the truth and we have nothing to fear. It's one thing that I've always found refreshing about Catholicism is it really takes arguments against it seriously. That's been my experience, growing up in kind of a secular age. I think most people, especially young people, are kind of forced with the question, like, do I actually believe this?
Yeah.
Because everything else in the culture would lead you to a different conclusion. Like, it's a lot easier to not be a Christian today.
Absolutely.
It's not popular. Maybe that's changing. We can talk about that too.
Yeah.
But so I think as a young person, when I started to think about these questions, and I was kind of curious about philosophical things, I guess I might not have called it that back then, but looking back, that's what it was. And I guess I kind of reached a point where I thought, it's either not true, in which case, why am I doing any of this? Why am I practicing faith at all? Or it is true, in which case, why am I not trying to practice it to the full?
Sure.
And living it to the full. So I guess I kind of hit that crossroads and had a lot of questions, a lot of doubts, and I was always impressed just with kind of the caliber of answers that I found. Exploring these questions in the same way that I explore any question, like even like Norse expeditions to North America, that kind of thing. Just like looking online, going on Google, talking to people about it, asking my teachers these kind of questions, and And I thought that there were really robust answers, and I think that is really a strong part of the Catholic tradition. I think a very good metric of whether someone is engaged in good faith in a debate, like if you're debating somebody about something,
Yep.
A metric that they're in good faith, that you can have a good dialogue with them, a productive dialogue, is if you ask them, like, can you argue my side? Can you like make the strongest case for my side?
Sure, that's a great point.
And if they're willing to do that, I think it shows that they're really interested in a productive discussion.
100%.
And it shows that they are really thinking about this question and not just kind of speaking in talking points,
Yeah.
so to speak. So when I talk to somebody and they really can do that, I take them seriously. And I think my experience, the smart Catholics that I've met over the years seem to be able to do that pretty well, and that gets a lot of respect in my book.
Yeah, again, there's a lot of different ways we could take this too, but like you said something that I think rings very true, at least to myself, in the sense that it's very easy to be overcome with doubt when things frankly just don't go your way. And sometimes I feel that it would be easier for me to not be a believer, for me to live a secular life. I could just go out, be promiscuous, don't worry about how much food I'm eating, just swear up and down. It would be a, quote, simpler way to live. But I compare it to what I've received in my relationship with Christ, and though I've lost some in that relationship as well, what I've received has been more plentiful, which is what he tells us will happen when we go into his embrace. And so with you, and you talked about how you respect Catholicism and you align with it because it stands up to scrutiny. Like, how would you describe your personal relationship with God, since the Catholic faith is what you fall on, like compared to the other religions, and even compared to being agnostic or atheist? Why do you choose to go back to Jesus?
Yeah. Well, one thing that comes up as you say that is it's just on this idea that it would be easier to not be Christian.
Yeah.
In a sense, that's true. We'd like to sin because sin is fun.
Yeah.
Like if it wasn't fun, then there wouldn't really need to be a prohibition against it.
Right.
There's a certain enjoyment that comes from it. Whatever it may be, greed or even anger, or laziness, all these kind of things. There's an
100%.
appeal to them.
Yep.
And this is something in the Catholic tradition too, that almost everything has goodness in it. It's just a matter of higher goods and lower goods. And like laziness, for example, laying in your bed is a good thing. It brings comfort, it brings relaxation, all these kind of things. But that is a lower good than the good that you have a responsibility towards, which would be like getting up in the morning and providing for your family and things like that. Right. So it's all a matter of higher and lower goods. So I think, not being a Christian and just choosing lower goods in certain areas of life is just less taxing on you, or maybe brings more enjoyment in certain ways. But I think I've a conclusion that I've been coming to more and more is that even if I were an atheist, I think I would still want to live out Christian morality.
Interesting.
Because I think it is actually true. Well, obviously, like I'm a Catholic, so I believe it's true. And so if Catholicism is true, then it's morality is true, and it should just be in accord with reality.
Yep.
But even experientially too, I think the kind of things that Christianity asks you to do, on a deeper level, makes your life better. And that's not to say that it's just a program. And if you just follow the program, you follow the steps, that things go better. And you don't necessarily have to have faith in God for that. I think that's a common view today too, taken by some people who are kind of sympathetic to Christianity, and they recognize its role in kind of shaping our society, shaping our codes of ethics, and all the ways that modern life is so much better than life in the ancient world. Not just technologically, but just like the way that people treated each other. I think it's pretty radically shifted. Tom Holland, the historian, makes this argument. I think it's the book Dominion. He makes this argument about how just like Christianity radically changed life in Europe and by extension a lot of the world, and it's just like at ways that are so fundamental that we're like blind to it. It's like we're fish in water, and Christianity is kind of just the water that we swim in. Even if we don't recognize it, even if we don't recognize all the ways that Christianity created the society that we live in now. So yeah, that's a conclusion I've been coming to more and more, is that I think you mentioned like that if you weren't Christian, you could just eat whatever food you wanted, right?
Yeah.
You wouldn't have to worry about gluttony or any of these kind of things. But I think that's a clear example of where, even if I were an atheist, I still would want to follow kind of the Christian principle on that.
Yeah.
And to treat my body as a temple, and to not be gluttonous, because it's actually better for you. Like, you will feel better, you'll be healthier, you will be stronger, you'll look better, all these kind of things. So I think that's a good example of that. But to the heart of your question, which is maybe rephrase it again. I want to get it right.
Well, when
to follow Christ, or what does that mean for you?
Yeah, I asked that when comparing these life choices, these life paths, when it comes to other religions, Catholicism, or being an atheist, why do you think you keep coming back to Jesus? And does it have to play into how you feel it stands up to scrutiny in regards to questioning?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was in seminary for a couple of years, considering a call to the Catholic priesthood, and I wrote a paper for my philosophy of God class about whether faith is a rational means of belief, or is it irrational.
Okay.
It was a question that was kind of interesting to me, because I think part of the answer to that is because I have faith. And that is a key component of being a Christian, is there is an element of faith, an element of trusting scriptures, trusting the church, trusting God, ultimately. So why do I keep coming back to Jesus? Because of faith. And yeah, I guess don't quote me on the finer details of theology. But I think reason has probably played some role for me too. I do wonder what would have happened, or how my life might have played out if I had started having some of these questions and doubts, started thinking about these questions in a new way. And the church that I was a part of just like wanted to sweep them under the rug, or didn't want to answer them, or the answers that they provided were not good. I don't know how I would have responded to that, but I think there is a better chance that I might have just said, well, there's really nothing to this religion thing, because it just doesn't stand up to that scrutiny. So yeah, I guess fundamentally it is faith, but it's been aided by reason along the way.
Yeah. It's interesting. Also, before we started recording, I talked about how I want this podcast to be like Joe Rogan, because I think he brings up great questions with great guests. And in the few snippets he's talked about faith and religion, he'll say like, look, I don't believe, but like the Bible has good nuggets of wisdom. And same with Bill Maher too. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he's an outspoken atheist, and he has said, look, at the very least, the Bible appears to be somewhat wise, and so even quote non-believers can sometimes find wisdom in it when they look at it. For myself, and I think for you as well, we have found purpose in life. At least when I've really devoted myself to Jesus and read scripture, I realized that the book isn't just wise, but it gives me a framing for my entire existence. And I'm wondering, as you mentioned faith just a little bit ago, how does your faith just kind of shape your own purpose in life and what you want to do and what you have done?
Yeah. Okay. I'll let me put a pin in that. I'll get to that. But also another thing that came up is, oh, sorry. I know what I wanted to talk about, but I forget what prompted this.
Okay.
But the idea that, oh yes, like Joe Rogan, being interested in Christianity, Bill Maher being interested in Christianity,
Yeah.
And seeing the benefits of it. I think Jordan Peterson, great example of that as well. It seems to be kind of a cultural moment. I was at a talk at Catholic University of America here in DC a few weeks ago that was talking about a potential religious revival in the West, and and that was a topic that kind of came up. Like, seems like it's becoming very, very popular to recognize the good role that Christianity has played, and all the kind of problems, all the kind of wild beasts that have come into the forest, so to speak, when we uprooted the fence of Christianity.
Yeah.
That kind of kept this nice, kind of kept a nice protective barrier around our lives. So a lot of people are recognizing that, and it's just an interesting cultural phenomenon. I hope it continues to move in that direction. It's very different than when I was starting to have these questions around like 2010 or late 2000s, early 2010s, where.
And how old were you at that point?
Middle school. I guess I would say this was like middle school, and at that time, the internet was a very atheist place.
Okay.
At least my experience of it, and atheism was kind of cool and rebellious and tantalizing a little bit. Like I would see the God Delusion book by Richard Dawkins,
right,
in the bookstore, and there was something just kind of like alluring and rebellious about that. And that kind of moment that now they call the new atheism has really kind of shifted into this new moment whereas like Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens and Sam Harris, spoke very negatively about religion, that it's a blight on society. That has really changed in the last decade or two. So it's very encouraging to see, but that kind of Jordan Peterson Christianity, I think, is not sufficient.
Right.
That like to the points I was making before, I think you will be better off just materially in your personal life if you follow Christian morality as an atheist.
Right.
But I think it's not enough, because I think well, I know it's also about grace. There's something that grace adds. There's something about a relationship with Christ. There's something that, as a Catholic, I believe the sacraments add, and that is something that is more than just kind of the natural effects that come from living in a good way. It's the supernatural effects that come from a relationship with a supernatural God. I said I would put a pin in your original question. I've forgotten this again.
No, it's quite all right, because the topic you just took us down was, I think, something I really wanted to hear about, and I found it to be more interesting than what I initially wanted us to talk about. My initial question was
yes.
was how does your faith kind of frame your own purpose for your life and what you have done in life already and what you want to do with your life.
Yep. Right. Okay. I think it kind of in a certain sense, everything flows from it.
Okay.
Or ideally, everything flows from it. And when I sin, it's not flowing from it, but it should be. I recognize that it should be. But like everything that I do, the purpose of everything, the purpose of getting out of bed in the morning, the purpose of getting a job, the purpose of writing an article, like if you just kind of follow the causal chain back of like, why did I do this? Ultimately, it comes down to, I believe in Jesus. And even if that, like, the reason I get out of bed in the morning it's not like directly because I believe in Jesus, therefore I get out of bed.
Right.
No, it's like I get out of bed because I have responsibilities to take care of today. And I'm taking care of responsibilities because I owe things to myself and others. And I believe that I owe things to myself and others because there's a meaning to life. I believe there's a meaning to life because Jesus created us, and God imbued life with deep meaning. Like we are the children of God. So in a sense, like every little action is has its own purpose, which comes back to God. So that's that's, I mean, it's a good reminder for myself now, just as I'm saying it too.
Well, that's great. Yeah, you know, again, there's so many different ways we could take this. I want to put a pin in the revival thing that you just mentioned, but like we talked about, the Runestone and how that's potentially a point of evangelism, if it ended up being true and whatnot. And there, like everything you just said about giving purpose to everything that you do in life, like I'm connecting with that absolutely. But there are people who don't feel this type of connection to their life, that struggle to get out of bed, that they don't see the purpose in providing for themselves or for others, and it can be kind of this selfish mindset, even if you're not fully aware that you're selfish. And so how do you think, because like a big contractor of people that like don't like Christianity is that like they think it's all made up and it's fake, and like they mock us by saying, well, we can see Christ in everything. Like, like when I look at the trees, I see a creation of Christ. When I have a good meal with friends, I see this communal, aspect of living. But there are some who think it's, we're thinking too deeply about these things that are just simple. How do you think we can and should try to evangelize to people who don't see these purposes in life that we're talking about now?
Yeah, if it's not true, then it is silly. I mean, it is silly to see something that doesn't exist in everything. So if that's their starting point, then they've arrived at a logical conclusion.
Right.
If they're kind of reaching that conclusion from that starting point. But I guess, if it is true, then it would be kind of silly to not believe that that's the case.
Yeah.
Like God created the whole world. He holds everything into being actively. He cares deeply about us. Like he cares so much about each individual person that it's as if almost nobody else exists. Like he would still care that deeply about you, even if no one else existed.
Yep.
Or he would care just as deeply about you. So how could things not be imbued with meaning? Now, sometimes the meaning is just very simple. Actually, almost all the time, it's very simple. Like I just described, like you get out of bed in the morning because you're a human person created in the image of God who has responsibilities, and there's a meaning. Like you don't have to like read some deeper metaphorical, there's a danger in over spiritualizing things.
Good point.
And but like if it is true, of course, reality would be like that, I think. If not, it would be silly. But in terms of how to reach people like that, or how to evangelize people like that,
Because that's something I struggle with, is evangelizing. And so I'm always looking for
Yeah,
distance when it comes to that.
right. I guess you talk about seeing Christ in trees and things like that. I think, trees are beautiful. We like trees. We like streets that have lots of trees. And so I think beauty is a good path to evangelization. And maybe that sounds kind of trite or something.
Sure.
Like, I see God in the sunset, and like,
yeah.
not convincing. That doesn't answer Richard Dawkins's objections to the reality of the resurrection or something like that,
Yep.
But I think it is powerful in this sense that if atheism is true, or if materialism is true, then life really has no meaning. I think it's hard to kind of get out of that. Framework. Like if you're going to be committed to materialism and atheism, I think it's hard to logically come to any other conclusion.
Sure.
Than that life doesn't have meaning. That really you are a collection of atoms, no different than any other collection of atoms, and nothing is good or bad or right or wrong. It's just I feel like some of the modern philosophers kind of make this point too. Like if I remember back to my philosophy classes, Hume saying something like, you cannot prove that there's such a thing as ought, or like should. That like you can inspect molecules all day, you will never find an ought. You will never find should.
Okay.
And I think it is completely impossible to live as if that is true. That because like if you choose to eat, you're kind of acting as if meaning exists, or there's some kind of purpose. If you choose to not eat, you're doing it for some kind of purpose. If you say, well, guess what? I'm just going to not do anything. I'm going to sit here because I truly believe there's no purpose. Well, you're just doing that for a purpose, which is like trying to prove. You think it's better to prove that reality than to not prove it.
Yeah.
So like you cannot take an action without recognizing the existence of purpose, which I think there's no way to logically believe in purpose or meaning if it is just matter, if it is just molecules. Then the thing is like you will kind of use that when you want to commit your favorite sin, I think.
Sure.
Like it's kind of convenient, like we're just talking about. Like it would be nice to be an atheist, because then I don't have to worry about my actions, because there's no right and wrong, and so I can just enjoy life. Sounds kind of nice, but the less convenient alternative is you have no reason to love your loved ones, for example, right? If there's no right and wrong or good and bad, then what justification do you have for that?
That's very true.
And so I think because it's impossible to really believe that life has no meaning, then I feel like in a certain way that should rule out atheism or materialism.
Yeah.
Because nobody believes that. Nobody believes that life is without meaning or purpose. So what's left on the table? What are the frameworks of reality that account for meaning and reality? And I think it has to be some kind of theism. We'll leave it at that.
No, yeah, that's great.
Just what kind of to tie it together. Like I started with beauty, and so I think beauty should kind of like shake you and wake you up to, because there's something clearly, something deeper, or it certainly feels that way. I mean, an atheist could still make the argument that there's actually nothing in a beautiful piece of music. It's just sound waves. It's just airwaves. Or beautiful sunset is just light particles moving in a particular way. But I think it is kind of hard to make that argument when you feel something, and that thing that you feel is not the molecules itself. It's not the airwaves itself. It is kind of an independent thing that does exist. And I feel like atheism doesn't account for it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, all this stuff is so profound. And now I'm going to go back to something you mentioned previously, which is this idea or this feeling or this glimmer of a spiritual revival. And, I don't think we've mentioned this throughout the entire recording, but we're not talking, in the same room right now. I'm in North Dakota, you're in Washington, DC. And so we're talking over Google Meet and whatnot. And being here in North Dakota, sadly, I don't have any signs of there being a spiritual revival. At least there's nothing that I've seen that has really, tipped me off to that. Is this something that you think you're experiencing where you live, or is it just because you're very well traveled as well too? Like, we could talk about that. I mean, we met in Medora, North Dakota, and then you went to Hungary for a bit, and now you're in Washington. So where do you think this sense of revival is coming from that you're seeing?
Yeah. Right. Well, I'll just say the statistics are really interesting on this.
Okay.
There was Pew Research came out with their statistics on church attendance in America last week or something. And the big story in this year's results is that there's been some prolonged stagnation in the percentage of people who attend church regularly. I forget if it's monthly or weekly. Okay. That there's been decline for decades and decades, and it's flattened. So when I say stagnation, I mean, like, that's a sign of the revival, that it's no longer going down, it is flattened. And it's been flat for about 6 years. So people are really curious to see whether this continues. Why has this happened? And so there's that. I think there are statistics showing that young people, especially men, like Generation Z men, there's been some kind of uptick in religious self-identification. There's some kind of murmurings that Gen Z might end up being a more religious generation. So I think statistics, there's some interesting statistics that while they might not prove a wave is coming or something, there are at least indications that it's moving in that direction. So there's that. There's just kind of on a cultural level, the fact that you see celebrities, right, or kind of the opinion makers of society.
Yes.
Whether they be the actors, actresses, or politicians, or public intellectuals, seem to be moving in that direction. So if they're moving in that direction, that's probably a sign that the culture as a whole is either already moving in that direction or is going to follow them.
Sure.
So there's that. I think just anecdotally, I've heard, or I've seen tweets, maybe even I've heard people say this too, that they see churches being fuller than they remember in recent years. I went to Ash Wednesday Mass last week, and the priest in the homily the next day, Thursday, said he had never seen standing room only in this big church on Capitol Hill.
Wow.
Or an 8 a.m. mass. So anecdotal things like that, I think are interesting. And also I wanted to just comment that perhaps you not seeing the revival in North Dakota could be an example of this kind of fish in water phenomenon too.
Okay.
That because I think, and after spending time in Europe, I was in Hungary for 4 years, moved back to America last year. My impression is that Europe is just a lot less religious than the United States, and the center of the country in the United States feels a lot more religious than the coasts. I do feel like a place like North Dakota is one of the most religious places in the developed world today.
That's a good point.
That I think it really, if you made a list of every first world country, every developed country, and every state, I bet North Dakota would be in like top 10 or something. Like, maybe not top 10, but it would be way up there.
Be up
right?
there, yeah.
So, yeah. So I think don't be discouraged about the state of things in North Dakota, because comparatively it's pretty good.
Yeah, that is a great point. I guess I hadn't thought about it that way. Again, keeping with revival and this idea of growth, what does spiritual growth look like to you?
Wow. Spiritual growth. I guess the word that I would use is holiness, and that's I think the word that Catholics generally use. And holiness comes from wholeness, like the idea of being whole, of being complete, of being full. And so I think spiritual growth is a move towards being whole, being complete. And I think being complete, being whole means living in accord with your nature. That you as an individual, you're not just a blank slate, you are a human being. And there are things that human beings do, things that human beings are good at. Like what is good for a flower is different than what's good for a human, because we have different natures.
Yep.
Like for a flower, it's good to stand there, soak up the sun, get some water, and grow leaves. Like these are very different. A flower is called to very different things than a human being is.
Right.
Because we have different purposes, right? Yeah, I'm trying to think of the best way to say this. Just like, I guess everything is kind of created to be a certain way, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
That like a flower is created to bloom, you know.
Yeah.
A human being is created to love others, have a relationship with God, be healthy and strong, all these kind of things. So holiness, I think, is recognizing your nature, and the most fundamental part of your nature is you are a child of God.
Yeah.
Deeply beloved by him. And then acting in a way that makes that more complete.
Yeah.
Or you know, because it's always incomplete, and it always will be for every person. But spiritual growth is making that more and more complete. And then just back to that point that I brought up before, that good things are good because they're good for you. And bad things are bad because they're bad for you. Even if it might not feel like that at the time. But I think like morality is another way of saying, or at least it's part of saying, living in accord with human flourishing. I think if you had to like boil down morality to just the most basic definition, that's what it is living in accord with human flourishing. And so spiritual growth and holiness is just the process of that. And I think you can generally tell the difference between being more complete or less complete, or moving in a direction towards completeness or moving in a direction towards incompleteness. And it's probably a sense that you pick up along the way too, that you start to feel the difference between living in accord with flourishing and not. And maybe you didn't know that level of flourishing before. Right. But once you hit that, then going back to the old way feels a bit off.
Yeah.
In the same way that I think you can cultivate good taste in things. Like once you've had, I don't know, a good a good steak, well seasoned with a nice sauce, you start to recognize that that's better than like frozen chicken nuggets and macaroni and cheese, you know? And not that chicken nuggets and macaroni and cheese is bad.
I love them.
Yeah, I mean, I love them too.
Yeah.
And chicken nuggets anyway. I'm not a big cheese guy actually.
Oh my.
But
breaking news here.
We just lost all of our Wisconsin listeners.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Travesty.
But you would, like, let's say if you were in the habit of eating chicken nuggets and mac and cheese all the time, and then you started eating healthy, and you started to like, wow, I have more energy during the day. I'm starting to look better, blah, 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 you know, things like that. Going back to chicken nuggets and mac and cheese would feel a bit off.
Yeah.
So I don't know where I was going with that.
No, it's fine, because there's, again, every time we talk about a topic, I always find these avenues we can go. Like, there's been so much growth even for myself just in the past, half decade, and I mean, literally talking about with food, like being a college student, I ate nothing but garbage, and then I met friends who really helped me both in my faith and also just in teaching me how to live like a better lifestyle. And like one of my best friends, whose name is Grace, I mean, she showed me the goodness of fruit and vegetables, so it's like, I appreciate that lifestyle change as well. And like, talking about growth and how it's happened over the last, 5 or so years, you and I met, we're going to go way back now. You and I met in 2019 in Medora, North Dakota. And I was there on a mission trip through this group or organization called CRU, which stands for Campus Crusade for Christ. And I was so young in my faith that, I like to think I helped people while I was there. I hope I did, but really everyone else, yourself included, helped me immensely. I feel like if I were to go do something like a mission trip now, being the man I am now, I think I'd be more effective. Not saying I was ineffective while I was there, but like so much changed while I was there. And I look back on Medora with a lot of fondness. I consider it one of the best summers I ever had in my entire life. And I don't keep in contact with a lot of people from that time in Medora anymore, sadly. You're actually one of the few contacts I have left there. But, I look back on Medora as a great time for growth for myself, for meeting friends, for, experiencing these fun things. How do you look back on Medora, and like when you compare yourself to 2019 and how we started as friends? Like, I just remember you and I having great conversations back then. Hence why I even asked you on the podcast to begin with, was you and I always seemingly have great conversations, and then we can talk about Medora some more too. But yeah, what's your memories of Medora?
Yeah. Okay. Let me pause.
Okay.
I'm going to grab a tea, and I'll give this some thought.
Yep. Yeah, please do.
And I'll be right back.
Okay, that sounds great.
Cool.
All right, kids. Luke is off getting some more tea for himself. I'd like to remind you that a new episode of the Far Out Podcast features me going through flavors of Mountain Dew, and that's what I'm drinking for myself here, while Luke is drinking wonderful, delightful tea. I'm drinking green sugar syrup. so there's that duality of man there too. And yeah, if you could also see Mr. Larson as well, he's dressed impeccably, and I'm just in a t-shirt and a baseball cap. So again, we're really doing the whole duality of man thing. If we had sponsors, this is where I would do a sponsored segment. But can you imagine me being big enough to get a sponsor? Like, it's impossible. I mean, but who knows? The sky is the limit, and all that good jazz. If I could be sponsored by anything, though, I'd want it to be something good, like something like actually good. Like I'd want to go with like a pretty decent company, like Black Rifle Coffee Company, BRCC. They'd be a cool sponsor as well. But yeah, it's just one of those things, and I'm really thankful for everyone that does listen, and I see views tick up and subscribers tick up and comments tick up, and just little by little, I hope that this becomes something that gets widely shared, and I just want to thank you for your continued listenership, and yeah, so I hope you're enjoying yourself today. I know I certainly am, and yeah, this is also your reminder, kids, that Superman, the movie, comes out this July, as I've said many, many times. Hello, Mr. Larson.
Hello. So I'm waiting for the tea to boil here still, but I appreciate that you said that this can be a very casual, natural conversation.
Yeah.
I always like to have a mug of tea in hand.
Okay.
When I'm kind of working, like during the workday, I love to just be filling one cup of tea after the next.
Yep.
A friend of mine in Hungary, American guy in Hungary, mentioned one time this Japanese proverb. I think it's a Japanese proverb, something to the effect of, life can't be that bad if you can always just fill another cup of tea. And it sounds very simple, but I really like it. That whatever's going wrong, like there is simple pleasure like tea that you can grab and enjoy.
Right. Yeah.
So it's always good for a long conversation like this. I know some people will extol the benefits of smoking. The social benefit of smoking a cigarette is that it's a great excuse to just like have casual conversations with people.
Yeah.
Especially in an era where there's less and less of that. I haven't smoked. I don't smoke. Don't plan to smoke. Yeah. But that would be the reason for me is to do something like just hang out at a cigar lounge, chatting with people. But for me, tea is that thing for me. I think it just kind of like is a good excuse to have a nice conversation.
It's funny you bring up smoking, because everything you just said about that is actually how I sadly started smoking. It was the social aspect of it. And I wasn't day to day, and I wasn't chain. Like if you gave me a pack of cigarettes, I could make it last like a year. It was like that. But like when I'd go out to bars with my buddies and they all step out for a smoke break, they'd be like, "Oh, come on, join us." Even if you're not going to smoke. And I go, "Oh, okay." So I would just stand on the sidewalk, and then they'd be like, "Well, if you're here, don't you want to try one?" And I'd be like, "You know what? Yeah." And so I was a very social smoker, but very thankfully, the podcast actually made me want to kick that even harder, because this is entirely just voice driven, and and smoking hurts your voice. You didn't know that. So when I really started getting into podcasting and stuff, I was like, I need to make sure I really, really kick the habit, even if it's a small one. I just want to kick it. And so just this last month, all this pack of cigarettes that I had just on hand, I threw them away, and I was like, never again. I'm never going to do it again. Even for the social aspect of come on outside and talk to us. It's like, okay, I will, but I'm going to stand a little further away to not get that secondhand smoke. And I'm certainly not going to do firsthand. So I am also, well, not also, I'm looking for my new persistent social contagion to just have on hand. And I'm not a big tea guy. I'm actually more into coffee now than tea, but perhaps I will get on the tea wagon there, the tea ship, and I'll get on that.
Yeah, that's good. I think I would be a massive coffee drinker.
Yeah.
If I liked the taste of coffee, but I just don't. So now we've lost most of our audience, not just
yeah, of course. Yep. They keep just what's that Star Wars quote? The more we tighten our grip, the more slip through our fingers, something like that. So something like
right.
that.
Yeah. But I think you could just like walk out with a cup of coffee the next time people go out to socialize with cigarettes.
Yeah, I certainly want to, and I have a Keurig machine now in my apartment, you know, and to me, that's like really high tech, you know, the fact that I can just put a pod inside this device and a minute later I get coffee, you know. But I know amongst, you know, really people who are really into coffee, like they're like, oh, Keurig is terrible. You got to have a French press or nothing, you know. And like for me, I'm like, well, it tastes good. So that's,
Right. You're still on the chicken nuggets and mac and cheese.
I am.
So you gotta right
Yeah.
I'm kidding. I think I'm the same way. I like tea, but I'm not a tea snob. I know there's some people who only get like the best loose leaf and
Yeah.
quality stuff, but like the Trader Joe's brand green tea
Yeah.
is enough to me. That's what I'm gonna drink here in like 2 minutes.
Okay.
Once this
It was,
water boils.
it was funny. While you stepped away to fill time, I just started rambling, which is what this podcast already is me just rambling. But I said that, you know, this would be where a sponsored segment would go. And I said, if I were to have a sponsor, I'd want it to be a quote, good sponsor. And one company I thought of is Black Rifle Coffee Company, which seems to be a conservative based coffee group. And I
Wow.
was like,
So
yeah,
they're getting a free sponsorship right now.
they
Free
are.
advertising, right?
Yeah, like yeah,
They won't have to give you money. You can just talk about it.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they've
Yeah.
got good stuff. Have you ever like? Is there a brand of tea that you really like a flavor that you really like?
Tezo, I think, is my favorite brand.
Okay.
They've got wild sweet orange is a great tea. I think that's like I slowly got into tea. My kind of gateway, my gateway drug into tea.
Sure.
Because I was that was one of those things that I was just stubbornly against. I don't like tea. I'm not going to try tea. It was like in high school or something, and I started drinking like Tang mixed with kind of the Nest tea, like powdered, unsweetened tea,
Oh my,
with like cinnamon. We called it Russian tea in our family,
wonderful.
and I started drinking a ton of that. And then from that, I kind of graduated to the wild sweet orange, which is this very sweet orange flavored tea. It's almost like a juice. And then in college, tried green tea once. I kind of liked it, and then I got into black tea, and then just kind of the floodgates open.
Yeah.
And but I do like Tezo. But actually, that's a good segue into the question that you asked about Medora, because when I first moved out to Medora in 2017, early May 2017, it's like freezing cold still in western North Dakota.
Yeah.
And I remember there's this flavor of Tezo tea called Passion,
Okay.
which is kind of also kind of a fruity tea. And that flavor, if I drink a cup of Passion Tezo tea today, still will just like transport me back
Oh yeah.
to 2017, to living in like this old bunkhouse in the Badlands of North Dakota. I was like one of the first people there, like alone in this strange foreign place.
Right.
And just in my little room, drinking Tezo Passion tea. It's a wonderful little piece of nostalgia. I see that my tea is ready, so I'll be right back.
Great, thank you. Yes, kids, while Luke gets his cup of tea, I'm now going to ask the question to you guys. Coffee or tea? Which do you prefer? Myself, coffee, as you could already tell. But of the world of coffee, what do you prefer for that? Do you prefer Dunkin', Caribou, Starbucks? Comment down below and let us know. Just while you were getting your tea there, Mr. Larson, I was asking the audience, minus Wisconsin, you know, which brand they prefer, whether it be Dunkin' Donut, Starbucks, Caribou.
Right.
And I said that I preferred Caribou coffee as opposed to any one of those three there.
Yeah. Caribou, good Minnesota company. I always support, or I always like the idea of supporting Minnesota companies. Actually, I've been meaning to just like do a search and make a list of Minnesota companies.
Yeah.
And start like prioritizing. buying Minnesota products.
That's
as
great.
As a proud Minnesota. But yeah, so to your question about Medora, what do I remember? Such a cool experience. I remember that first summer just thinking like, why would I ever do something different with my summer again? This is so cool.
Right.
Just like so many fun people from around the country, around the world. Fun job, just such a cool atmosphere. You're just living in the Badlands in this beautiful, beautiful setting. And almost everybody's a tourist during the day. And it's kind of fun to be like the insider in the place. You just go hiking, this beautiful landscape. You make new friends like every other week.
Yep.
And yeah, there was this feeling like I should just do this forever. You know, it was right after I graduated college, and it was just like I loved just the campus atmosphere of college, and it was just a continuation of that. But there's a time and a season for everything. It was definitely the time and season for that at that point in my life. I'm so grateful for it, for those 3 summers that I spent out there. Yeah, it's fun looking back on the work experiences too. The fact that there's all these kind of unexpected twists and turns of life that you can't plan for or expect, that if you just are kind of open to it, if you are willing to live on the edge of your comfort zone, like you don't have to go too far beyond your comfort zone to something that's just way too uncomfortable. But just being on the edge of your comfort zone and putting yourself in good places, surrounding yourself with good people, then I think just these wonderful, unexpected things happen. And the experience of that in Medora was being around these kind of historical reenactors, like, because obviously it's Theodore Roosevelt National Park.
Yep.
Medora is the gateway to Theodore Roosevelt National Park. It's the place where Theodore Roosevelt, as a young man in his 20s, was a rancher in that area. So there's a lot of Theodore Roosevelt history. Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library is being built as we speak there. So there were 2 Theodore Roosevelt reenactors there. There was a guy who became a good friend of mine who was Quentin Roosevelt, the son of Theodore Roosevelt. So I got to know them.
Is that right?
Through my work as What's that?
He played the son?
That's right. Yes, exactly. Quentin Roosevelt, youngest son of Theodore Roosevelt.
I didn't know he played the son the whole time I was there. Anyway, I interrupted you. Continue, please.
Well, yeah. So working as a museum docent and a tour guide, telling people about the history, I got to know him. Joe Wiegand, Larry Marple, Austin Arts, and great people that encouraged me to kind of be on the edge of my comfort zone. Acting is not something I had any experience in.
Yeah.
But if it wasn't for Joe Wiegand saying, "Hey, you know what? Why don't you come on my show sometime?" He did a daily show for tourists. Theodore Roosevelt. Salute to Medora was the name of the show. He just kind of did a monologue as Teddy Roosevelt. Extremely entertaining. And he said, "Why don't you?" Because every summer there's a gathering of Theodore Roosevelt reenactors from around the country. Okay. So there's like a dozen guys who portray Theodore Roosevelt, and often their wives too. Like Larry Marple's wife played Edith Roosevelt. Okay. Will come for a conference in the summer, and so I thought that first summer, I thought, why don't I grow a mustache and I will be a young Theodore Roosevelt for that conference. But the more I learned about the history of Medora, the more I became fascinated with the Marquis de Moore, this kind of eccentric French adventurer and aristocrat who founded the town of Medora with a big vision for what it would become. Fascinating story. And I became more drawn to that part of the story of Medora and decided that I'll be the Marquis. And so Joe invited me on his show. I did end up growing the mustache and portraying the Marquis. I remember. And the rest is history. Yeah. So to speak. for the next couple summers. That was part of my job, was portraying the Marquis and doing performances and interacting with tourists in the city. So that's when people ask for a fun fact, that's one of my go-tos. Is I portrayed an 18th century French aristocrat in a small town in North Dakota, the Badlands of North Dakota. So a big part of my job was to speak in a French accent every day.
So when you were there, were you just an impersonator of the Marquis, or were you also for Theodore Roosevelt as well?
Never portrayed Theodore Roosevelt. Always Marquis.
Okay,
it would be fun. I'd love to at some point. But
okay. Yeah. So I remember there were several times when you and I would get lunch together in Medora, and you would still be in your full garb, your Marquis garb. And I always thought, like, this guy looks like an adventurer. And then you were like, "Hi, I'm Luke," we just started talking and whatnot. Yeah, I mean, I didn't realize you were in Medora for 3 summers. I thought you were there just when I was there. So I mean, I felt envious of that. I mean, like in addition to getting this fun life experience of bringing, Marquis back to life, like, did you feel any kind of growth in terms of like your own faith? Because like, again, I went on a mission trip, so like I was, in addition to me working that summer and having fun that summer, it was also part of my duties to try to evangelize and to host these kind of community outreach things. Like, how do you feel that you growed as a person in Medora?
Wow, that's a very good question. I guess I'm gonna just kind of reflect on the cuff here. It was a very, I would say it was a pivotal time in my spiritual life. An interesting crossroads, because my first summer there was the summer before I went into seminary. The second summer there, I was a seminarian studying to be a priest. And my third summer there, I had just discerned out of seminary. So it was really kind of it was a pivotal time in what as Catholics we will call vocational discernment, that everybody is called to a certain vocation, either to priesthood, religious life, or married life. And Medora was really kind of it was probably the most pivotal moment of that process for me. So it goes hand in hand with that. And as seminarians, we prayed a holy hour every day. So you spend an hour in prayer, and you pray the liturgy of the hours, which is kind of a traditional prayer of the church that goes throughout the whole year. There's a cycle to prayers and scripture readings that every priest throughout the world prays. Seminarians pray it too. So I spent many hours in that little St. Mary's Church, which is I think the oldest active Catholic church building in North Dakota, built in 1884 with the funds of the Marquis. So that church has a very special fondness for me. I just think back to those first days in 2017 when it was kind of a ghost town. And there I was in the morning before work. It was cold, spending time with the Lord. And some nights, finishing work late at night, and I had to get that holy hour in, and I probably ended up sleeping through most of it.
Oh, sure.
Late at night in that little church. So it is, when I think back to kind of just what was happening spiritually at that time, I think back on it very fondly. Seems like the Lord was working in a special way. And he always is working in our lives in the way that we need at that time. But there's something that feels kind of special about those, I guess, transitional times in life. Or maybe a better word than transitional is like, a better way to describe it is like when you're embarking on something new. And I was embarking on seminary. I was embarking on life after college. I was embarking on life in Medora. So, um, and and a funny thing too, I that I noticed in Medora, because as you mentioned, there were Cru missionaries there. Um, you know, Protestant or non-denominational. It's a Protestant non-denominational organization, right?
Yep.
And I really enjoyed the Bible studies that I took part in. I really admired the faith of those college students who came out to evangelize. But it's funny. I find often when I'm in a context where I am the only Catholic or one of the few Catholics around, it feels invigorating to me.
Okay.
Like the experience of maybe being challenged in my Catholic faith a little bit, being prodded,
Yeah.
is kind of a fun experience, and I think it actually, looking back, it strengthened my faith.
That's great.
And it felt stronger at that time too. It was good to be constantly reminded that I am Catholic, and that means something different. That means kind of a life that's lived in a particular way. So I would say that was an aspect of my kind of spiritual growth at that time too. I think also, even before I knew about the opportunity to work in Medora, that last semester of college, I kind of came to the conclusion that I don't spend enough time in nature.
Okay.
And I started going for walks kind of in the woods by campus, and just feeling really kind of, I felt alive doing that. I felt invigorated by that as well. And yeah, I think that there's a spiritual aspect to that too. I think that is something that
Yeah.
that God was leading me to at that time. And so being in Medora, I think, was just an excellent place to be as I was coming to that realization, because it was just in a beautiful natural landscape. And
Yeah.
just there was something something beautiful, something wonderful about hiking through the Badlands, climbing up a new peak in the quiet, in the silence. And I think
Yeah.
it's a lot easier to hear God's voice, or to be aware of what's happening on your interior, in your
Yeah.
interior life, when you allow yourself those periods of silence. So
Yeah. No,
yeah.
I look back on Medora very fondly as well. And I drove out there last year just for a literal day trip. I got there by noon, ate lunch there. I just played tourist, and I walked around, I wandered around, and I took in its beauty, and I thought of everything about that's where the Bible studies were. That's where we had the campfires. That's where, Luke and I ate lunch. And there is this spiritual like quality to all of it, because that's really how we met, was around that kind of cohesiveness. You talked about when you were there how you had this prayer schedule, and I'm curious, what role does prayer play in your life, in terms of your spiritual journey?
Hmm. Yeah, I think without prayer, there is no Christian life. That it's essential for the Christian life. Um, I think something that was really instilled in me in seminary is just the importance of a daily habit of prayer.
100%.
And that and not to put too much of an expectation on it either. To not expect spiritual highs every time, and
Very true.
uh, and feelings of consolation, and that really the most important thing is to be faithful. So whatever amount of time you've kind of set aside each day, and I think you should set aside some amount of time each day. What is actually going to bring about the most growth is just setting aside that time, even if it ends up being you feel like you get nothing out of it, or
Yeah.
it's early in the morning, you fall asleep again as you're kneeling down, and and you wake up when the alarm goes off for the end of your prayer time. But just that faithfulness to prayer. I don't remember who said this, but I remember in seminary hearing that, like, faithfulness to prayer when you don't feel it is going to yield more for you in your spiritual life than faithfulness to prayer when it's really easy and it feels great and all these kind of things. So yeah, that's the role that it plays. It's an essential component to keeping a relationship with God. And even if it doesn't feel like something magical or special, or doesn't feel like, quote unquote, it's supposed to feel, I think it's kind of like watering a plant. Sure. Where you never see the plant grow, but if you're faithful to the watering,
that's a good point.
It grows up,
Yeah. And you're a man of the Catholic faith, and I know that in Catholicism you guys pray to saints and to Mary. How do you think those kinds of prayers strengthen your relationship to God?
Yeah, the Catholic understanding of asking for intercession from saints, the way that we look at it is like asking a friend to pray for us.
Yep.
And if I can ask a good friend of mine, hey, I've got a big job interview coming up. Could you pray for it? Or anything. I have a family member who's sick. Could you pray for them, please?
Right.
That us asking the saints is the same thing. That they are spiritual friends. That we're a member of the church with them, and they're even closer to God than my holiest friends here on earth.
Okay.
That they are, they're even closer to God. Like, I think there's kind of a natural intuition that we have. Like when we ask for prayers, I think we're naturally inclined to ask people who we feel are pretty close to God. Like you might ask your pastor, who has a very deep relationship with God, or even a friend who has great spiritual depth.
Yeah.
So the Catholic understanding of that is, well, how much closer are the saints to God, in that they've already run the race, they've fought the good fight, and they are in His presence in heaven. So that's the understanding there. I think also, in terms of what it does for my spiritual journey, is that they are role models. I think that's an important role that the saints play.
Okay.
Like, they are to Catholicism what the Hall of Fame is to baseball. Okay. Like, the Hall of Fame is something that you aspire to when you're a kid, like, or something that you aspire to even if you make it into the big leagues. Right. Not just to play, but to be one of the greats. Yeah. To back to the point of wholeness and flourishing and completeness. Like, they are the ones who came the closest to that ideal. Like, the Hall of Famer is the closest to the nature of what a baseball player is, so to speak. So the saints are that in the church, but it's just kind of like a Hall of Fame of people that you can look up to, who come from all walks of life, who lived out the faith in all kinds of different ways. You have married people, you have monks and nuns, you have people who grew up poor, you have people who grew up rich, you have people from America, you have people from France, you have people from Japan, and there's kind of a Catholic understanding too that that certain people will be drawn to different saints, or even the idea that the saints want to help us just as they wanted to help others in this life on earth, and that the saints might choose you. And actually, kind of a fun example of that in my own life, tying back to Medora.
Great.
Was the Marquis de Moore, was born 1850s, 1858, I believe, in France. I think he was born the same year as Theodore Roosevelt, and
very fitting.
And that was always a joke that I made in the performances, by the way, too. That Joe Wiegand, the performer who played Theodore Roosevelt, is a few decades older than me, and we would appear on stage together, and I would say something like, and I am 3 years older than Theodore Roosevelt, but as you can see, I have aged a bit better than he has.
That's great. I like that.
Anyway, so he was born in the 1850s in France, and a good friend of his was a guy by the name of Charles de Foucauld. Charles de Foucauld, and they were best friends at military school together. They hosted parties in their room. They would like hop the train to Paris together. Yep. Very close friends, and they had very different views on religion. The Marquis was a devout Catholic, and Charles was an atheist, and so they would debate religion. And Charles had a deep conversion experience after working as a spy for the French government in Morocco, of all things.
Okay.
And had a deep conversion experience, turned to Christ, and lived radically for Christ. And he tried to live the life of Jesus in Nazareth. So he went to Nazareth and lived a simple life like Christ did, and ended up living as a hermit in the Sahara Desert. Okay. And evangelizing people there. All this to say, he became a saint. He was canonized a saint in the church. I think it was just last year. So that he was a saint that I really feel like chose me, because I never really had thought about him or really knew about him, but learned about him through learning about the Marquis, and then learned that he almost joined the Marquis in going to Medora. Oh, wow. When the Marquis had his plans to set up this little town in Dakota territory, but he decided not to. And so that's an example, I think, of a saint who I feel like just kind of appeared in my life, and it felt like very opportune. And that there are qualities in him that I wanted to emulate. That's
really awesome.
So there's an example of how it played out in my life.
Yeah, I had never heard any of that. That's really awesome. And so you're in Medora. You're there for a couple of years. You and I cross paths. I leave. I go back to college, and then after you left Medora, you went to Hungary, correct?
Yes, that's right. It was about a year in between.
Oh, there was a year. Okay.
There was a year between of preparation for that. I was did a certificate program to teach English overseas, which is how I initially went to Hungary. I was ready to go to Hungary the beginning of 2020. COVID hit, threw a wrench in those plans, and I ended up working at Icelandic State Park in northeastern North Dakota that summer. Great experience too. Yeah. We had some good memories out there too of hanging out. And then Hungary was after that. Yeah.
Okay. So I've hardly ever traveled anywhere. The furthest I've gone is maybe in the US is Florida. I've been to Winnipeg a few times, and just recently with some friends I went to Colorado. Like, that's it. So for me, I'd have to really consider and think about for a long time of just going anywhere, but you get on a plane, you travel across the world to do this great thing of teaching English. What was your mindset like going into that decision? And then what was it like actually being in Hungary for 4 years?
Well, I'd always gravitated towards everything international.
Okay.
I was fascinated with maps as a kid. I liked learning languages. Um, I think I knew a good deal of people from other countries, kind of growing up too. Um, Even in high school, there were lots of students who were not born in the United States. And in college, I loved getting plugged into the international student community, going to international student events. So it's just kind of been a theme throughout my life. Always loved traveling too. I think that's kind of what spurred it, is the fact that my parents took me on some cool trips around the country,
Okay.
and even to Europe a handful of times. That really kind of instilled a love for and curiosity and the rest of the world. So that's kind of what went into it. And finishing seminary, I had just kind of this burning desire to live in another country. And like I say, there's a time and season to everything in life. And in that season, I just had a burning to just like get out of Dodge
Yeah.
and try to prove myself somewhere else, and just kind of take on that challenge of living in a foreign country. Um, and so so that was my objective at that time. And English teaching was a way to do that. It was a way to get experience in teaching too, which is something that I wanted to explore as well. So those things kind of went hand in hand, went well together. So what was it like then arriving in Hungary? Wow, it almost feels like when I think back to the first days in Hungary, it almost feels like a different life. Like
Okay.
a different. It's funny, like the summer before Hungary, in a certain way, feels more recent than the beginning of Hungary.
Okay.
The beginning of Hungary just felt like I don't know, just like a different world. Not that Hungary is radically different than America. I will say that, like, sometimes people ask me about the culture shock and things like that, and to a certain extent, yeah, there were some things that were maybe shocking, but mostly it's a European country, not that different culturally in the grand scheme of things than the United States. But yeah, just being in that new environment felt very different. I was ready for the challenge, excited for the challenge. Part of it is just colored by the fact that it was COVID,
Sure.
and a couple months into the job, schools locked down, and most of the year was online. I couldn't travel outside of the country. I was in Hungary for uh, almost a full year before I left the borders, before I was able to leave.
Okay.
So it was that. The job was something very new to me as well. That might have been the biggest just kind of culture shock, was stepping into a full-time teaching role. I'd done some part-time teaching in different ways, and tutoring before that, but the full-time teaching role was something new. So yeah, I was ready for the challenge. And I at that time I remember reading that there are two types of homesickness, or I guess two types of people when it comes to homesickness. There are people who feel homesick in the first 6 months, and then they're fine after that.
Yeah.
And there are people who feel fine right away, and then 6 months in, the homesickness hits.
Oh, sure.
And I think I was the first type,
Okay.
that I felt homesick more at the beginning, where we're just, I guess, just kind of the shock of being thrown into a new culture. It's not just like a trip where, I'm just going to enjoy it. It's going to be a couple weeks, soak it in. This is fun. And then I go back to my life. There was something a little bit daunting about the idea that I'm not going back soon.
Sure.
I'm here for at least a year. A year is a long time.
Yeah.
So it does not feel like the next time that I'll be in the familiar will be soon. So that I think was looking back on it, that was kind of a key difference just about the experience of life, was that feeling. Um, but so those first 6 months, I remember ordering a lot of pizza, and I remember I kind of got on a kick of watching movies that were set in Minnesota.
Okay.
And watching just like very American movies. I think I remember watching like The Patriot with Mel Gibson.
Oh yeah.
And watching the Fargo TV series.
Okay.
Um,
I've not seen that. I've only ever seen the movie. Is the show good?
The show, the first season, I liked a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was good. It was very good.
It just went downhill from
Actually,
there.
a Hungarian student of mine, Hungarian high school student, recommended it to me during class one day.
Great.
He knew about Minnesota through that TV show. So
That's awesome.
yeah.
Yeah. So okay. So you get to Hungary, and like for me, I can't even fathom being in a country that like speaks differently from me. I mean, what was it like just with that aspect of now not knowing the language? Like how did that, and then you compound COVID on that as well. How did that impact you navigating the country?
Yeah. The language part was the most exciting part for me. It was the most fun part. The challenge, the most fun part of the challenge, the part of the challenge that I was looking forward to. Just because I've long been interested in languages. In college, I really made an effort to learn to speak Spanish well. Picked up some Portuguese in that time too. But I think it was the first time that I seriously tackled a language that I had no familiarity with.
Okay.
That I actually that summer in North Dakota, I just did some Duolingo Hungarian.
Okay.
And I remember I picked up a book, a Hungarian grammar book at a used bookstore in St. Paul. And it was so old that one of the first words in the vocabulary section was elvtárs, which means comrade, like from the communist period.
Oh my. Okay.
So it was this old Hungarian grammar book. So I started working through that. But when I hit the ground in Hungary, I couldn't say much more than hello, thank you, how are you? And that was a really fun experience for me. And I loved just kind of being thrown in the deep end where, I'm in the lunchroom at the school among my colleagues, many of whom don't speak English. And I just kind of had to, pluck up the courage every once in a while to try to express myself saying something or like asking a clarifying question.
Sure.
But I found putting some effort in, and I put a little effort in. I did like half an hour a day, as I remember, of studying on my own. That plus just the constant input, just like every sign that I see when I walk around town is in Hungarian. Everything that people are saying around me is in Hungarian. When I'm in the teacher's room or on the street, it was one of the first times in my life that I was developing relationships with people who did not speak English. And that was kind of a fun new experience. And really forced me to learn how to express myself. Exactly what I was looking for, by the way. Like I wanted to have an immersion experience. Because I'd always heard, that's always the advice that people give for learning a language is just throw yourself into an immersion experience. It's the best way to learn. It's the fastest way to learn. So I was excited for that. And it's so fun to make the progress along the way too. It's just like, I think it's good in life to have something that you're just constantly working on, whether that's like learning the guitar or I don't know, it could even be like getting better at your job, where every day you're working towards that goal and you can feel yourself progress. I think this is why people really get into working out too, is there's just kind of a feeling of accomplishment that comes from seeing results. And so that was that thing for me when I was in Hungary, just this constant thing that I could improve on. and Hungarians really appreciate it when they see you putting in some effort to their language. They're so unfamiliar with foreigners trying to learn Hungarian, because it's only spoken in this landlocked country. I mean, actually, it is spoken in minority regions in neighboring countries too. But I mean, 15 million people. It's not a lot of people. It's not a dominant language of the world. And so, to the point that they're so unaccustomed to hearing foreigners speak Hungarian that it's hard for them to understand people who speak in a foreign accent, because they just don't know what listening to Hungarian in a foreign accent sounds like, or at least don't have as much exposure to it. Whereas Americans, I think, or English speakers in general, very, very accustomed to hearing people who have learned English as a second language, or maybe speak it with an accent from a different country, like Australia or Ireland or something like that. So yeah.
What's like, I just want to learn about the country. We could do a whole episode just on Hungary alone, but like, we talked about chicken nuggets and mac and cheese. That's like a pretty prime American food. What is a pretty basic food, or something that's widely eaten there? Like, how was the food while you were over there?
Very good food. Kind of the classic food in the region I was living in was töltött kapusta, stuffed cabbage, and it's like rice and meat, usually pork, wrapped in a cabbage leaf, and it looks like an egg roll basically. Very tasty. They eat it with sour cream. Goulash is, I would say, like probably a very typical, well-known Hungarian dish. Often different than what goulash means, or it is different. Like, it's completely different from what goulash means in the Midwest. Like, when I thought of goulash, I thought of like noodles and hamburger and stuff.
Yep, that's what I'm thinking of right now.
Goulash is like a very hearty, brothy soup with beef and carrots and potatoes. It's kind of peppery. Like, it's got a lot of paprika. Paprika, by the way, is one of the few Hungarian words that made it into English. And so there's that. Lots of stews, kind of like with little dumplings, and meat with a good sauce. But to understand Hungary, just kind of the bird's eye view, you have to understand that it's a very unique country, set apart, and it always has been that way. And I think a lot of people assume that it's a Slavic country. It's not Slavic. The language is not Slavic. The language is Finno-Ugric. It's in the Finno-Ugric language family. So the only national languages that it's related to are Finnish and Estonian, hundreds of miles away. So I always like to tell people English is more closely related to Hindi or to Persian than it is to Hungarian, because at least English and Persian and Hindi are all in the Indo-European family. Hungarian's not even an Indo-European language. Finno-Ugric, it's different. So the language itself is very unique. The people are unique. They see themselves as being set apart, having a very distinct identity. They're not like the Slavs. They're not like the Romanians. They're not like the Germans. They're not like the Turks. And they're kind of at the crossroads of the continent. So they've been steamrolled many times over the course of history, and are very proud that they've managed to keep their identity. And I think that just animates so much of kind of the Hungarian ethos today, is this will to survive, this will to remain different, surrounded by much bigger, more powerful cultures than themselves.
That's great. I had no idea about that. What kind of like activities do they like to do? Like, we have like football as a pastime, baseball as a pastime. What kind of sports do they have over there?
Soccer is number one for sure. And so soccer is by far the king. Hungarians have performed very well in water sports for whatever reason.
Okay.
I like to think it's because they lost their coastline after World War I. They lost 2/3 of their territory, including their coastline on the Dalmatian Sea. I think that's what it is. Like they had like modern day Croatia. So they lost their coastline, and so because of that, I like to think that they, as kind of retaliation, just became extremely good at water polo and swimming and things like that.
Sure. When you were there, did you learn any water polo or any soccer, anything like that?
Never played water polo when I was there. Played a bit of soccer, yeah. And I went to soccer games too from time to time. Actually, the small town that I lived in, Kisvarda, had like the second best soccer team in the country. It's kind of inexplicable because it's a town of like 16,000 people, and it's doing better than like the big historic clubs of Budapest.
Oh.
So it was a fun time to be a Kisvarda fan.
Okay, that's awesome. So after you're done in Hungary, you come back to the U.S. You're now living in Washington, D.C. You know, like if Florida is America's playground, you know, Washington, D.C. is where business gets done. It's where the wheels turn and stuff like that. And so, broadly speaking, which country do you prefer to live in, the U.S. or Hungary? And then I'll talk about other stuff.
I need to make a master list of the things that I like better about living in America and things I like better about living in Hungary.
Okay.
I haven't made that master list yet, but I guess the short answer to that question is there's things that I like better on both sides of the ocean.
Yeah.
America is home. America is where my loyalty lies, and nothing can replace home. It's my culture. It's what I grew up in. It's like everything about me is shaped in some way by America, which I think you appreciate in a new way when you move abroad. Again, the fish in the water analogy, like when you live in America, just everything is kind of tinted with Americanness. More so, I think, than any country on earth. Or at least we can say in the developed world, sure, that America, like we just produce so much of our own culture that I think many Americans just watch American shows. They just watch American sports. Their diet is a pretty American diet. Right. Hard to do in a country like Hungary, where you are just a small island of your own culture surrounded by a vast sea of otherness. Whereas America is this like global power. Our culture is so dominant. Yeah, you really can live a very full life just as an American. It's hard to, you know, advance in your career and things like that without speaking English if you're a Hungarian, you know. So yeah, I think I really came to appreciate what it means to be an American, how that sets me apart from the rest of the world, how that makes me like what are the particulars of Americanness. Yeah, remind me where I was going with that.
No, it's fine. It sounds like you were gonna, you know, segue into something almost about like patriotism, but you kind of talked about how you recognized, you know, how much you appreciate America and how you can recognize its, you know, its stamp on the world, us being so dominant versus Hungary that you know really isn't. And so you come back to America now, and you've clearly had these life-changing experiences. You've learned a lot from Hungary. You know, when you get back to America, you know, I mean, like, and you eat like a cheeseburger, are you like, oh, it's good, but it's not a Hungry dish, you know? And you know, like you watch baseball and you're like, this isn't as fun as water polo, like, you know, or soccer, you know, like Like
Uh,
even just in cultural comparisons like that, like how do you kind of make sense of that?
you've chosen two things that I put in the America category on the master list: the food
Okay.
and the sports. So
All
that's
right.
the short answer to those questions. Like, yeah, food in Hungary was great, but I have an American palate. I think that's part of it. And
Yeah.
I just like coming back to America and going to just like a typical pizza joint. It's like, this is amazing.
Yeah.
I never once had a pizza this good
Sure.
in Europe. I had good pizza, but there's something just different about it. And sports, soccer is fun, but I still prefer. I'm a baseball fan at heart. I prefer American sports.
Yeah.
But part of it, to kind of to that point about patriotism, I think it did make me more patriotic, or it deepened my sense of patriotism or developed it. And partially in the way that I look at certain metrics and I see America is objectively better on certain things. I think Americans uh, have have more prosperity than a lot of Europe. I think that's something that people assume is the other way around,
Okay.
but is not is not the case. Like if you look at the Human Development Index, which is kind of it's a metric that tries to capture the quality of life different parts of the world. Even Mississippi, which people will joke about being like a a third world country or whatever. We just lost our Mississippi audience.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
it's funny you mentioned that. I was actually born in Mississippi. So
or yeah, okay.
there's a collection that's loyal to me no matter what happens. So we'll be all right there.
I lost the host of the show even.
Yeah.
No, but the point I was going to make is that even Mississippi, which is usually at the bottom of a lot of metrics in America, performs a lot better than huge chunks of Europe.
Okay.
So there are ways that it deepened my patriotism in the sense that I looked and I saw, wow, we have it pretty good in America, just objectively, and I think in a lot of ways better than other places to live. But mainly, I suppose it deepened my patriotism in the sense that it made me just kind of realize that America is my own. America belongs to me in a sense, and that gives it a quality that no other place can have. That gives it it owes my loyalty, or I owe my loyalty to it in a way that no other place uh, can demand.
Yeah.
Like in the sense that, like, I guess I think of it this way, like um, I you love your family in a certain sense because they are your own, that that you belong to them, they belong to you in a way that no other people ever will. I guess when you get married and you have a family, I suppose that's the one way
Sure.
that that happens. Um, but I don't need to claim that um, that my family, the members of my family, are the smartest people in the world, or the best people in the world. Like at the end of that doesn't matter as much as the fact that I belong to them and they belong to me, and because of that, um, I love them and care about them more than any other people, or that they're special to me in a way that other people are not. Um, no, like I think my family is great. Like I think my family members are smart and kind and very good people. In the same way that, like, I would say America is a great country. I can objectively point to ways that it's great. Um, but really what makes it have the special quality that no other place can have is that it's home.
That's
And
great.
that and I think everybody should have that feeling about their homeland,
Yeah.
about their native country. Everybody should have that patriotism. I think the world, um, yeah, I think countries are better off when people feel that they have a stake in the country and a loyalty to it, and they love it, and they want to see it flourish. So
Yeah, I agree. And um years ago I used to be incredibly patriotic, and I still am a patriot, and I still love my country. But like back then, you know, you could cut me open and I would bleed red, white, and blue. Whereas now it's just red. And to be patriotic, especially in the context of being an American, it's it seems like it's such an ugly thing nowadays. People love to rebel against their own country. They love to say this place is terrible. And I think that there's a good middle ground that we can strike and should strive to strike between being critical and recognizing our own nation's faults. But then, like you said, also having that sense of this is my home. I'm a part of it. It is a part of me. And I should do my best to influence it in the best way I can. And yeah, I just, and you also talked about, a wife and kids and raising a family and the whole deal. And in addition to teaching my future family about Christ, I also intend to teach them about having a patriotic sense of self as well. And yeah, that was just a really nice point you brought up, especially bringing that up in the confines of comparing, you not having this worldly view of being in Hungary, whereas me, I'm almost purely just an American. I've only been to Canada a handful of times, so it's really interesting. When you got back to America now, you went from, typical Midwest because you're from Minnesota, and you go to Washington, D.C. What's it like now living in Washington?
I love Washington. A lot of people that I talk to who've spent time in Washington are maybe a bit jaded about it or have lots of negative things to say. I haven't reached that point. I hope I don't. I don't think I will. I think that comes from probably bad experiences with kind of the transactional nature of working in politics. And I suppose it is a city that attracts people who are drawn to power, people who are maybe cutthroat, and so it's very different from living in a place like Minnesota or North Dakota, where I think people are very genuine and kind. But my theory is no matter where you go, you can always build a social circle of good people. And there are ways to do that. I mean, I think finding good Christian community is a great shortcut to that, no matter where you are in the world. So that's kind of been what I've tried to cultivate since I've moved here to DC. And Budapest, we didn't talk so much about my time in Budapest, but that was such an exciting place to be as well. That there were just like always events going on and lots of interesting people, and it's a young city, and so much to do, so much happening. DC is that times like 10 at least.
Okay.
There's just it feels like the capital of the world. In a lot of ways it kind of is. Like America really is the eminent global power, and so many things that get decided in the world at large happen in the city. Another thing I really appreciate too is it's just a beautiful city.
Okay.
That might be, and I think this is something that I would put in the Europe column. I would love to see that change, but Europe is just so beautiful old architecture.
Okay.
And I think as Americans, we kind of take America as the baseline, and then traveling to Europe is like going to this magical place out of the ordinary, something beyond what can be expected here.
Yeah.
After living in Europe and getting used to that, the kind of beauty of the architecture of Europe, which is not just like the typical city centers, like Budapest has an amazing, beautiful city center, but even the small towns, this kind of the very pretty old churches and old houses and things like that. You take that as a baseline. Coming back to America kind of feels like a shock in the other direction,
Yeah.
where it's lots of strip malls and big parking lots and just kind of modern buildings with just glass facades, which I would say is not, it's not intrinsic to America. American towns, I think, used to look beautiful like European towns do now, or at least they were more that way. And they look very American too. Like there were American architectural styles. So I appreciate living in a city like Washington that is very old, very historic, and has been preserved. Just these neighborhoods on Capitol Hill with the old row houses, just gorgeous. Like I wish the whole country looked like that. So that's a big plus in the Washington column. It's just beautiful.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's funny. When we were trying to set up this podcast recording, there was the brief idea that perhaps I could travel to Washington, and it's certainly an area that I want to visit, and just hearing you talk about it now, makes me want to visit it even more. So it's good to know that there's still beauty there, and like you said, you can find good social circles there, and because you're right, we do have this opinion of it where it's just so brutal and depressive, and so to get literally a boots on the ground report of it is nice. And something else that you and I bonded over when we first started talking and becoming friends is our appreciation and our love of baseball, most notably the Minnesota Twins. But now that you're in Washington, I have to ask, are you a backdoor Nationals fan?
No way, not at all. I will never have loyalty to any Washington team or any non-Minnesota team for that matter.
Wow.
Okay. There's no, I think that is something I'm very firm on, is that I am a Minnesotan.
Okay.
And that will not change. If I live somewhere else, I am a Minnesotan living in that place.
Hey, that's great.
Yeah, that was that's something I really tried to reinforce when I was in Hungary too. I talked about Minnesota a lot.
That's great.
I was in Hungary. And so actually that's part of the appeal of living in DC, and not the suburbs of Maryland, not the suburbs in Virginia, but being in the District of Columbia itself. I kind of like that it's not a state.
Yeah.
That I'm not like nobody can call me a Virginian or a Marylander. Like I feel like DC is kind of this neutral space that is just meant for the whole country.
Sure.
Where people from every state gather, and they like a representative in Congress for Minnesota is a Minnesotan still, even though he has a house in DC and works in DC. He's representing Minnesotans. He belongs to Minnesota. I feel the same way in DC, that I am a Minnesotan. I belong to Minnesota, and I'm here in DC, and hopefully something in my work can help to make Minnesota a better place.
Hey, that's
the
great.
The country too, but I am a Minnesotan.
That's really awesome.
Minnesota.
Yeah. And it's great that you're rooted in your appreciation, and when it comes to Minnesota, especially on the sports side, because I'm a Minnesota sports fan, Timberwolves, Vikings, Twins, but through family affiliations that I have to Kansas City, I'm a backdoor Kansas City Royals fan. So I do kind of like them. My Twins are my number one, but the Royals are my, if the Twins really just pee the bed, then I pivot to the Royals. And so
I've noticed on your Twitter, in your baseball postings, I do see some Kansas City Royals content coming through.
Yeah, and you'll sadly see some more coming, because we're in the swing of things now, pun intended. We're in spring training, and we got the season coming away, and so what are your hopes and dreams for the Twins? Because we're in potentially a big transition period with that organization, because we're potentially changing owners, and now they're going to be on TV more, or at least through a streaming service that they have, Twins TV. So it's like the Twins are changing a lot inside of their own clubhouse. So what are your hopes for the team there?
Wow, I think some excellent developments. The Twins TV is awesome.
It is.
Man, if that existed when I was 10 years old,
oh my gosh,
I would have spent probably 3 hours every day watching the Twins. So it's great to see. I'm eager. A fun thing about living in Hungary was I could get MLB TV for the Twins. Whereas if you live in the blackout restricted area, you couldn't watch MLB TV. But now I think with the Twins TV, you can watch it in that area too. So very happy to see that. I really think it's good for baseball.
Yes.
I think it just needs it became less accessible. I remember as a kid there was always at least one game a week, and by the time I was in high school, you just couldn't watch Twins games on TV anymore.
Yep.
And so I think that's excellent that it's turning around. The new ownership, I have to say, when I first heard about that, I was pretty worried.
Oh yeah.
Does that mean that there's potential that the Twins move?
Oh yes.
Just some owner from somewhere else just scoops them up and ships them out to Charlotte, North Carolina, or somewhere.
Yeah.
But it doesn't sound like that's realistic.
No, I don't think so.
So I'm happy to hear that. I forget who are the brothers who own the Phoenix Suns.
The Ishbia brothers.
Right. They were talking about buying the Twins, and then I heard there was some chatter about like the concessions prices at Phoenix Suns games, and you can get like food for $5 instead.
Oh my!
I was pretty excited about that. If you could have affordable food at Target Field.
Yeah, could you imagine?
It'd be awesome. Yeah. What a great vision. I hope whoever the new owner is kind of recognizes the positive reaction that Twins fans had to that. So my hopes and dreams for the Twins, to see him win a World Series in my lifetime. I mean, I grew up with the stories and the highlight reels of the 1987 and 1991 World Series. I never saw Kirby Puckett play, but he was my all-time favorite player.
Yeah.
So we have certainly lived through some heartbreak.
Yes, we have.
And it was awesome 2 seasons ago to watch the first playoff win.
Yes.
Since I was in 2nd grade, 8 years old, just getting into my Twins fandom.
Yeah.
They gave me a taste right at the beginning.
Yeah.
I saw one Twins victory as a kid, and a lot of heartbreak. But it's at this point it's really a part of the mythos of Twins fandom, and it will make the World Series victory all that much sweeter when it does come.
Yeah. Well, hope springs eternal for Christianity, for our country, and for our favorite sports teams. And I think that on that note, it's such a perfect way to end this conversation. So, Luke, I just want to say thank you for being so generous with your time. And you really gave me a lot to think on, both in terms of entertainment and just education as well. I found this to be a really insightful conversation. And I know that the listeners will as well. So if there's anything that you want to plug, like, that you're working on, or even something like you should check out this book, if there's anything that you want to mention, go right ahead and do that.
Well, I'd just like to plug the Far Out podcast with James Mosey.
Yeah.
Listen to the next episode. If you made it 2 hours in, then stay tuned for more great content. But I know I really appreciate you inviting me on. So fun to do this. I guess I don't think I've ever really done this before. So
you were a natural.
Great intro to it. So thanks a lot, James.
Yeah, thank you so much. And if you ever want to come on again and have another conversation, please reach out. But otherwise, we'll say goodbye for this time. So thank you for listening. And you've been far out, so stay far out. And we'll see you in the next one. All right. Bye-bye.